Good morning and welcome to the Voice of Authority webinar brought to you today by the London Construction Programme. My name is Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director of 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one of the ways that we continue to do that is through this online channel, the Voice of Authority, a platform for councils to discuss their ambitions and challenges and influences and issues of urgency. And one of the most pressing issues that we're facing right now is the pressure on procurement. As the government's new regime for public sector procurement emerges, procurement departments are facing challenges from a number of sources. Construction is subject to unprecedented fluctuations, with inflation and labour and materials all impacting prices substantially over the lifetime of a project. And that's not even mentioning the impact of building regs. And add to that the impacts of war in Ukraine and 2 years of pandemic, all of which are feeding through into the market, so that 20 construction firms went into administration in August alone, and that's up 18% on the same month last year. And 2.5% of all construction firms that claimed COVID-19 loans have defaulted, perhaps presaging a wave of administrations. So in this environment, we wonder, is it sensible to issue single-stage contracts and focus the risk on contractors? Those in a strong position are increasingly selective in work they take on and seeking to share more risk with clients. Others may squeeze supply chains to create margins, and that could affect quality and even delivery. So how can the public sector and supply chain come together to overcome these risks and create a more stable and secure future for construction and development? And what does the appropriate commercial approach look like? Can both client and supplier operate with enough flexibility and consideration of each other's situation to create a plan for survival? And can the cost of responding to the climate emergency be accommodated in that plan? To tackle those questions, we've assembled a cracking panel for you, and it's a pleasure to introduce you to the Voice of Authority today in alphabetical order. Joe McCormick, who is Assistant Director for Procurement at the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and Barry Phelps, who's Head of Procurement at the London Borough of Haringey, and Kim Ridge, who's Managing Director at City Axis. Now, make the most of the expertise assembled on your screens, viewers, by firing in your questions through the Q&A function, and we'll address as many of those as we can during the course of the conversation. And we welcome your observations in the chat also. And we've got a few questions for you via the online survey function, and you can contribute to the discussion by answering those as they pop up onto your screens over the next hour. So let's get that hour underway and get the discussion started by asking our panel to set the scene a bit for us. Let's start with Joe. Joe, can you give us an idea of the scale of your procurement programme? What have you delivered over the last year or so, and what are you planning to deliver over the next few months?
So we have a reasonably large scale procurement programme, and most recently we have begun, as with many other local authorities, to look at much larger development and bring on stream larger development programmes than we had previously. We'd had a lot of individual neighbourhood programmes that have been successful over the years, but we've just moved into that stage of some of that larger development programmes, and two major programmes presently going through procurement now. We have also a range of very local and bespoke activity that's undertaken around our particular neighbourhoods and our particular properties, and also lowest level needs in relation to repairs and in relation to improving each of our challenges that we're facing. I think that it's been interesting for us at this point in time, and speaking to some of my colleagues across London, to understand how best to get what we're needing from the market, how we can meet some of the outcomes residents are seeking in a climate that's so challenging. And we're seeing for some of our medium-sized projects a drop-off in some of the responses from the market as they try to manage some of that tension. In terms of some of our major development, we're seeing a mixed response in terms of who can accommodate that and who can't.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. Barry, do you want to give us a sort of scene setter on London Borough of Haringey and LCP, London Construction Programme, and how the two work together?
Yeah, hi Toby, and hi everybody. Good morning and welcome. So just to give a bit of background then in terms of the difference between Haringey. So I'm head of procurement at Haringey, and obviously look after the expenditure within Haringey itself, but I also head up the London Construction Programme. And the London Construction Programme has over 50 public sector members, predominantly focusing on London and the home counties. And that acts independently from Haringey, although it's hosted by them. We do look after the interests of both our members, but also the supply chain as well. We like to see quite closely. So you'll kind of get, I'll try and give you most of the perspective from London Construction Programme today, as we've got Joe representing other public sector organisations, but I'll give you a little bit of a flavour around Haringey as well, just because we've got such a large programme. So in terms of, if I look at our capital programme over the coming years, we've got in excess of 1.5 billion, which will be going out over the next couple of years. And that, you know, a lot of that will be in housing, but there are other capital programmes that we've got, and we've got things like regeneration of Haringey, Wood Green, Tottenham, and also a new civic centre. So there's quite a lot of exciting things that are happening in Haringey. So from my perspective, I need to be very much on the pulse around what's going on in the market at the time and some of those challenges, and we'll discuss some of those a little bit later on today. From a sort of spend perspective, we awarded over 200 million in the last 12 months just in construction. If I look at where the LCP is and the direction of travel that we've got at the moment and the pipeline, we've probably got circa 500 million in the pipeline across London and the home counties that cover the LCP memberships, and that'll be both from our major works programs, but also we operate a minor works and professional services on a dynamic purchasing system. One of the things that I have noticed recently is that the amount of projects that are being paused or that are being cancelled because of the affordability issues has been quite significant, certainly in the last quarter. So I'm sure we'll talk about some of those challenges a bit later on, but in terms of bit of an insight to myself, Haringey and the LCP, I think that'll do for me for now.
Thanks, Barry. Joe, how does that 1.5 billion programme that Haringey has in the pipeline, how does that compare to Hammersmith and Fulham in scale? Are you around the same sort of scale?
So in terms of committed capital, major programmes, it's a £600 million set of programmes that have been agreed through Cabinet.
Great stuff. Thanks, Joe. So 600 million through Hammersmith and Fulham, 1.5 billion through Haringey, another 500 million through the LCP. These are huge, huge numbers that are in play at the moment. Kim, what's your role at City Access in all of this? What do you build? What have you built? What's the scale of your operation?
Good morning, everyone. The scale of operation, we're an SME. We'll turn over this year. It's always work in progress through the year end, but I think 15, 20 million, so a very different scale from my two colleagues on the panel. Our work is mainly D&B. We have a very, very good team around us in terms of the professional side, so we tend to select projects that need some interest and they need some good collaboration with our clients. Typical project size, 2 to 6. I think we're on an upward trajectory despite the market, which is quite interesting. Projects getting bigger, albeit much slowed down. We're specialising in projects that are interesting. We're moving to sustainable building. Currently have 2 CLT buildings going on. We completed 2 very award-winning buildings for Kew, Royal Botanical Gardens Kew, of one circa 5-6 million, the other one of 2 million, and they're achieving sustainability awards, and one is actually up for a global award. The interest, we cover commercial. We're currently on a Park Lane residence, a triplex, which is progressing on a very high end. We do a lot of education. We've been working with Haringey and been reasonably successful through the LCP under Barry Phelps. It's an interesting market, and I will endorse everything Barry said, that we're sort of managing through the volatility at the moment, and we'll talk about that later, I expect. With the back of the mind is always the threat of what's going on in Europe. And that is without doubt having a major, major effect on migration of workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on in every avenue you can think of. But we're still buoyant. I'm the founder and managing director. We've been going 32 years, and we're not over yet. So,
good stuff. Well, we look forward to bringing that experience to bear on some of the challenges that we face, Kim. But it's interesting that you're on the panel, and we're going to talk about the difference in how the market's responding to sort of smaller and medium-sized projects compared to larger-sized projects, and also, you know, where the climate emergency premium, if you like, can be squeezed into all these rising costs and shortage of labour and so on. So with your sustainability credentials, that'll be an interesting element. Let's just unpack those challenges then. So we'll ask each of the panel in turn what the single biggest challenge you face in delivering your programme is, and how you're currently responding to that. Joe, back to you.
So I think the biggest challenges for delivery have been around, most recently, been around responding to changes in the market and some of the volatility in the market. I think there's also been a focus for us on understanding how best to bring forward and work with our supply chains. We have an established and successful area of work around bringing some small businesses through into our supply chain and securing business for them through the work, some of our programs. But we want to build on that, and we're doing a lot of work with a range of different small businesses across the sector, picking up some of our architects and so forth, and specialists and advisors, as well as some of the work that we do in regular delivery and smaller businesses picking up the actual work on the ground in the development side. I think that a third big challenge for us is understanding how best to get the best outcomes for our residents in the round. So we're looking to secure and do secure significant additional benefit through our planning agreements, through our different funding agreements, but also through our focus on social value more broadly, and ensuring that we understand what added value residents get from any investment that we make in the borough. But that is something that we are passionate about and have had some significant success in, but we're also needing to balance in this mix, in this climate.
So why is that particularly difficult now, Joe? Are we talking about the additional, because costs are going up, it's difficult to squeeze extra money out of a development to secure, you know, 106 benefits?
No, I think it's we continue to negotiate very good deals in terms of what additional benefit we can get. But I think as we look forward, we need to understand how best we can maximise that, and how we understand what the regulation changes will mean for us. So at this time it's working, but more thinking on a forwards focus. As those regulations change, how are we going to respond to that and continue to build on the success we've had in that particular arena.
And then in terms of you mentioned the volatility of the market. What does that actually mean in practical terms? What volatility have you seen? What are the changes?
So in the more medium-sized development work, we're seeing differences of response, and we're not always getting as good a response as we were previously in all instances. And so we're working with the market to understand how best to get the best responses and to get the best developments up and running.
Fantastic, thanks, Joe. Barry, how does that resonate with you? And what are the challenges? Are there any other challenges that you're facing at LCP particularly?
I could probably sit here and talk for about 3 hours on the various challenges that the members are experiencing across the LCP. I think for me, some of the emerging themes that I've seen is it's taken a long time for people to kind of wake up to the reality of the market and the changing dynamics. And there is a lack of flexibility in terms of people's approach to the market, to procurement, you know. So we touched upon single stage design and build earlier on. You know, most of the market is simply not interested in that because of the level of risk that they need to absorb, particularly when they are expected to price in, you know, what's very challenging conditions at the moment. 3, 4, 12 months, you know, I've even seen, you know, things come across that are saying, oh, can you fix your price for the next 3 to 4 years, you know, on extremely large projects. So that's, you know, for me, there needs to be an element of people understanding the dynamics of the market, and that's not just the local authorities, it's the consultants that they employ as well. You know, quite frequently what will happen is that public sector will rely on some of the consultants to provide that advice and guidance, and that is not always up to date, or it doesn't necessarily take into account what will happen in the future. So that then sort of sets expectations, if you like, at a certain level. But the reality is that they don't always meet those expectations, and there's, you know, several challenges within that. And so, you know, quite frequently we are seeing members having to, you know, having had a price submitted, that price is now increasing because, you know, the way the dynamics are in the market around cost of materials, cost of labor, even the availability of those has been a challenge over the past sort of 2 years and that. So there are, you know, lots of different elements, if you like, that need to kind of be taken into consideration. And what we try and do at the LCP is, you know, we will try and advise and guide people because we're very close to the market, we're close to our supply chain. You know, we don't just look at what's happening within Haringey, we look at local markets, regional markets, national markets, and even international markets. So that, you know, last year we were supporting people in trying to understand what some of the challenges were with supply chain that was coming in from Europe, that was, you know, normally coming in from Canada or China and stuff like that. So where, and kind of around that commercial side of things as well, and trying to help them to structure that. And where they do listen and where they kind of take that advice on board, the responses that they are getting in relation to tenders back from the supply chain is much higher than if they kind of tend to go into their comfort zone and do what they've always done over the past X amount of years. You know, we are in a very different market now. And I think that public sector need to adapt to that market and some of those challenges.
Yeah, just before we go to Kim, Joe, I'm going to give you the chance to respond to that. So do you feel that you're adapting to the changes successfully? Do you feel you're on the right track to being able to get the market to respond in the way you need it to?
I think that there's been a lot of work by local authorities, including our own, to respond and work very closely with the market and understand how best to ensure that we've got things being delivered in the way that we need them to be. I think that there's been work to respond in our technical processes in procurement, in timelines, and that we will accept in terms of prices, and looking at ways in which we can accommodate some of those needs. But I think there's also a challenge because you're not always clear which factors are driving it, and you're having to respond rapidly to the different kinds of supply chain, particularly with some of the global factors. So suddenly you've got a shortage in particular sets of supplies, and that changing programming and so forth. And so you're having to be quite agile in how you deliver. People are very hands-on in terms of seeing what happens on the ground, and so we're often achieve being agile, but it's not an easy thing to do in the context. And the multiple factors that you raised at the beginning that are affecting the markets overall, all at play at once, make this a more unusual scenario than perhaps people have seen in the past.
I'll say. Okay, Kim, over to you. So we're looking for the biggest challenge that you're facing in delivering construction at the moment, and also maybe a response to Barry and Joe's comments about how the public sector is trying to be increasingly agile in responding to market conditions, and your experience of that.
You said agile.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. I've got about half an hour. Yes. I think it's very interesting sitting here as we tap into a lot of the public sector market via various frameworks, etc. First point that is very difficult to deal with is the new role of the portal in tendering. It keeps you away from your client, and there's this feel that if you talk to the client's representatives, you're getting unfair advantage and everything must be shared, etc. It's not the way to get someone to get a job set up. We've had several bids where we don't actually have anyone meet us on the site, and this might be a £3 million bid. There lies a big problem in trying to mesh yourself and understand. And as I'm an architect and I spent 7 years understanding, you had to get a good brief. And this, that's one of the problems. Next one on the public sector side is the time, the process. One of my guys in the office, one of my senior project managers said, well, Kim, I'm glad you're going on this because never once in 4 years has a bid response come back in time. This leads to a sort of decay in the whole system because we know nobody will be responding to us back in time. And we have certain time limits, and I have lost tenders by being 3 minutes too late. And then I might wait 6 weeks for a response. So I've still got one of 2 years ago. I haven't got a response on. I know what's happened. I think that leads to another question, the caliber of the people you're dealing with. I agree, Barry, entirely that some of the, particularly in the QS side, if I be so rude, they're behind the times. You've got to get real. We're on a very, very different, changing market by the month at the moment. And I think all this started with its real metamorphosis, most probably the latter part of last year. Obviously, seriously affected by the April Times, as you'll see by going back to sort of data of expected rises in prices. Our problem specifically at the moment is we're going to a bid, is the reliability and availability of supply chain resource. They've all got their problems as well. They can't afford to run their plants. They can't get their gear. And we're sitting with a lift in Spain somewhere at the moment. It'll come in 7 different components, and some of them will be coming. They'll all be different as we planned it. But the client is working closely with us. Flexibility on being realistic, not throwing LEDs at us, which some lesser models in the QS will try and do. I've never had to pay any, but it's all a problem. And we're on the high alert at the moment for a project to be derailed. And that's what 2 years ago, that wasn't the case. It's a very, very different world. And also how to deal with going forwards. And Barry knows about, we've been discussing one where I'm having to price for 12 months in the future. It's pretty well an impossible task. Now, how do you deal with the risk? The obvious thing is put it on the contractor, but the contractor won't take it now. They're pushed to the end. And I think this, and very important, single stage tendering is most probably a little bit too dangerous in these markets for larger projects. The next problem is, can the contract deal with the changes? The answer at the moment is no. Advance payments. People want paying now because they know there's a chance you won't be around in 6 months' time. But we've got to get the bigger powers working with us to work on that, using vesting, whatever, to try and safeguard. I've mentioned caliber of consultants. I think everyone needs a shake-up, actually, to say this is a different world. And then, of course, Challenger program. You take all this, you set your program, it will change. COVID will come back again. We're still getting knocked by COVID, but it doesn't bring the news. But we might lose every 4 weeks, we might lose 2 days on an average. Might be more. We kept going through COVID times, and we worked very closely with our clients. It is all about collaboration and flexibility now. But certain resources, certain methods and processes stop us doing that, which I think is counterproductive from this powers that be, the local authorities and so on. And that's, if we manage that, well, that's basically a few. So I'll pass over now because I go on for a long time.
That's a great list of threads for us to get tucked into. One of the things in the sort of preparation for this event, one of the things you mentioned was the need for you to price in increasing costs of labour over a project. And I think you mentioned a figure of how much you're adding per day to your workforce costs. What was it?
Well, on site, on the senior management, of which it's I'm fairly cynical, and I do apologise for that. I've been around too long. Site agency now, there is a definite, utter lack of good people. Anyone who's got anyone semi-sensible, they'll be keeping now. They don't. The agency market, as you all know, tends, and this will upset a lot of people, tends to attract the people you wouldn't take on board anyway. And we're going through some problems at the moment because we simply can't put in the right people. We're gathering them, but it's it's a timely and a hard process. The sort of money, from last year to now, we're looking at, terms of £500 a week upwards on labour, all the way through the chain, down to the carpenters now are going in without any tools, asking for £250 immediately before they start negotiating. Yep. And this is what's happening to the market, and it's getting worse at the moment. I think it's, if we can keep Ukraine stays sort of in this nasty threatening situation, it will start abating, but the threat's there, and that's one of the issues.
Great stuff. Okay, well, let's start tucking into that. But while Barry and Joe consider sort of responses to some of those threads and how we might combine those with the challenges you're facing and look for a way forward, I'm going to ask the audience to respond to a poll on to just have a dig in at where they feel the construction sector is on this. We're going to ask you audience on a project valued around 2 to 10 million, what do you think the average actual contractor overheads and profit margins are today? So let's see what the perception is out there of where that sits and how that influences our conversation. I'm going to come back to you, Barry, first, and we've got the ability to project pricing, to predict what pricing is going to be, particularly around labour costs, but also other costs, and the supply chain availability, and that obviously plays there's an overlap there. The calibre of resource available on projects, and the ability to get a good brief and timely response. So those were the sort of main threads that I picked up from Kim. Is there anything that LCP can do, that the public sector can do, do you feel, to ameliorate some of those or take a step forward on some of those?
So I think in terms of, if we try and manage affordability and the increase in pricing, I think some of the advice that we've been given recently is to try and move towards net present cost models. That helps de-risk some of the issues that we have and apply an agreed indices or basket of indices which are appropriate to the projects. That kind of helps manage some of the risks between the supplier and the client, if you like. Where that's not happening, what we have is we have experience with contractors applying up to 30% risk, in some cases even more than that, just because of the fluctuations within the market. So even if you look at the BCIS, which isn't always appropriate for every single project, I understand that, but it kind of gives you a bit of a baseline to move from. They're projecting 7% rise to Q1 in 2023, by 2023. But that only picks up small elements of it. If you're in a project where quite labour intensive or material intensive of certain types, we know that labour costs are going through the roof at the moment. We know that there are certain materials that are still continuing to rise at a rapid pace. There are some that are coming down, but how sustainable that is another matter. So we're not, to try and project that is extremely difficult, for the supplier, and to be honest, even the suppliers, when you look at their supply chain, depending upon the type of material, they may not even be able to get prices for 2 weeks time, let alone 4 or 5 months down the line. And when you kind of look in the period of time that it takes most public sector organizations that have awarded a contract, or completed the procurement, should I say, they kind of got a preferred bidder, so the tenders come in, they've gone through the evaluation process, they then have to go through the governance process and finally get to award. That could be 3, 4, 5 months down the line, and suppliers are being asked to lock in their prices. So my view at the moment is that whilst we're in a period of such volatility, using an NPC or net present cost approach with fixed points for doing the uplifts and adjustments helps balance out the risk. And this is what it's all about, it is about balancing out the risk. But what we're also seeing as well is that actually, some of this is simply not affordable. and I spoke about a lot of projects being paused at the moment and not going forward across the membership. And that is really because, public sector in particular will be facing, enormous pressures financially, both locally and as a national issue. But, councils, housing associations, other public sector bodies are having to make some difficult decisions now, because actually the price has increased so much since when they were kind of, developing the schemes, that it is no longer affordable for them to do that. So they've either got to scale back on that, or defer, or actually, cancel those projects. So I'll pick up on that point, and I'll let other people pick up on some other points.
Great, thanks, Barry. We will return to that, and we've got another event focused exactly on that that theme coming up next month. Joe, is there anything you'd like to respond to Barry's points, but also those other points that Kim was raising as challenges to the construction industry?
So I picked up one of your points, Kim, was around the kind of portals in tendering and the challenges of portals and process, essentially. And I hear where you're coming from. We've been reviewing alongside many other local authorities the best way to get a system that works as best as it can, notwithstanding that doesn't take away all of the challenges you're describing in terms of that side of it, for both those seeking to secure businesses and invest in businesses and programs, and those who are bidding. So I think there's quite a lot of work to do there. Right at this point in time, there's quite a lot of questions for us to ask, because we're still waiting to know how the regulations are going to play out, what that will ask of us, how much more regulations going to come in, or how many more rules will apply in terms of the process that we'll then have to show in terms of our transparency to ensure the fairness as described, and what that kind of new take on value and how it's assessed might be. And obviously that's still going through Parliament, so we're still waiting to see the final outcomes of what that might mean for us in full, and the associated guidance. But there's a lot of work going on in the background, and how that then plays into the systems and processes that we then run. So for us, we're kind of in that, excuse me, we're in that position where we're kind of having to judge how best to position ourselves, and developing and changing what we do have, and responding to the challenges that some of what we do have around those kind of portals, and running those systems as slickly as possible, and those processes as swiftly as possible, in a context of not only the volatility we've just been talking about around inflation and the global context, but the nature of the rules that we have to play by once they come through. So it's a double whammy from a local authority point of view at this point in time, as we start to work through those processes and understand what it means for us in practice. And I know a number have started to try to develop something that gives much more flexibility, but we're still waiting to understand all of the procedures and routes that will be available to us under those kind of new flexibilities under the procurement regime. Which offer, I think, some great possibilities, but also alongside that kind of the technical and the process side that goes with it, and how we kind of balance those out, so we get the benefits that some of the benefits that some of us are seeing in those things that are coming through the system, without some of the downsides that can come with that.
Thanks, Joe. So Kim, does that sound like to you like good news? Albeit there's a lot still to come there. But that's the right direction forward for you. And also, does sort of net present cost, does that help you get around some of the challenges you face? And let's throw into that conversation the results of the poll. So how accurate is our audience in understanding where you actually make how much you actually make, and what it takes profit-wise in order to sustain a business in such difficult circumstances?
Well, they're interesting. But
it's quite a spread, right?
It's quite a spread, where we thought it'd be, though. On the new flexibilities, yes, it's all terribly encouraging. The proof is in the pudding, and how it comes out and how it's interpreted by the people pushing, the supporters, the consultants, etc., who are actually processing the projects. I think the biggest point about this, that the one that really affects us, is we're reasonably successful because we surround ourselves with clever people and particularly on the professional side, partly because of my background, I guess. But very rarely do we get the chance to show that. So in a tender is about price, even though it might say 75-25, 60-40. It's very difficult to actually show you understand the contract. You have some other ideas and you can bring that to the table. And that is, it continually frustrates us because we know if people gave us that chance, once we get amongst people who understand, we normally are successful in the program, in the project bid. A lot of the time when it's just purely a bunch of sums, especially if it's 60-40 price qualitative, normally we wouldn't bother to return on that. That's for the guys playing the big games, and you'll mostly take on someone inappropriate for the project who will then work the claims through it. And it's that cynical approach now. So we tend to select very carefully. And all the points people are saying about contractors are obviously being so selective. If they're any good, they will be, and the chances they're not, they'll most probably eventually go bust. It's, I think it's that damning now at the moment.
Yeah.
So anything that could open up that to understand more. So I'm basically talking about collaboration.
Yeah.
And that being stymied, not encouraged, which is the wrong way around as far as we're concerned. On your next one about, on your you're looking at this scale, this basically your sample here of what people think about profitability, that really sums it up. Anyone who runs a business knows you have to make a certain amount of money to be successful. And that margin that you're using as your success will move up on top of what happens underneath it. I will stay reasonably static. We apply a little bit of margin too when we know a job's going to be difficult because we're going to have to work so hard to get information and get responses. We will put a margin up on those sort of jobs because it literally takes PM time. So we judge looking at the caliber of what's coming our way. And if it's so bad, we won't bother to respond because it's not worth the effort. Mm-hmm. And you had another point, which was.
So Kim, just on this survey, where do you sit in terms of the margin? Where should we understand that businesses are?
Well, businesses have got to be certainly between the 11 and 20%.
Yeah. Subject
to size of business. Obviously, there are advantages for the bigger tier 1 contractors, but they're making profits. They have to make profits. And if we could remove that illusion from the market, it would be somewhere moving forwards.
Yeah, it's really interesting that only a third of our audience had that accurate picture.
It's always an interesting question. I ask people this continually, and Barry's had the guts to mention it and put this poll up, and I think it's very interesting to do so. So it's perception is reality.
We've also got, Barry and Joe have been really gutsy in the subsequent polls that we're going to put up, because you mentioned earlier the experience of external advisors and how much expertise there is available in this process, and that has a bearing on that perception of what businesses need to achieve in order to survive. So let's launch our next poll, which is asking how our audience rates the experience of external advisors and their knowledge of how to deal with current market dynamics in the process, and let's see where the audience think that lies. And I want to sort of move the conversation on a bit, because Kim, you've opened up this idea of the need to understand the expertise of your partner, to understand their ability to make a difference to a scheme and to respond to some of these challenges. Joe, first, and then Barry, how do you see the public sector, the procurement process might be flexed, might be able to adapt to have a more collaborative approach, develop more of a sort of partnership approach with your suppliers?
So from my point of view, speaking kind of sector-wide, I think there's an opportunity, particularly for large development, for us to build on what the gold standard offers. And then I'm also interested in understanding what the gold standard, how we can pull from some of the values from the gold standard, and how some of those elements in there might also apply to other kinds of procurement, and how that might weave through. It's written specifically for certain size of development, but actually some of the points that it raises touch exactly on what Kim's been describing here, and I think there's room for more discussion around, okay, how might some of that apply, how might some of that work for a range of different sizes of development and construction that we undertake, because at the heart of it, as I see it, there's something around, have you got an alignment with a business that understands and shares values with you as a commissioner of those services, and are you and of those works, and are you able to work together to get the outcomes in our case for the residents on the ground? Are we able to change the nature of the infrastructure, the nature of the communities from a place perspective in a way that brings benefit and added benefit to residents along the way? And the heart of the standard, as I see it in kind of layman's terms, is how do you work together, and how do you set up the way you're going to work together from the get-go? Now, at the moment, the regulations don't permit us to do that in all ways, and I'm very smiling because what I'm talking about is exploring how might we change some of that, and how might we get some of that flexibility. At this point in time, you can't achieve that under the present rules, but that's the bit that doesn't work for us. And I suppose there's a piece there more broadly about localism, and where does localism fit in that broader national framework for procurement, which I think many local authorities, or any local authority, will obviously be keen to see progress and develop.
Barry.
So a few good points there raised, by both Kim and Joe. I'll touch upon the regs to start with. So for me, the new regs that are coming in will provide public sector an opportunity to be much more engaging throughout the process. So I think there is a good opportunity that will, should we say, release some of the shackles that might be there at the moment. And if it's structured right, then, we should get some really good positive outcomes of that. Obviously, we're still not quite sure when that's coming in, and that is a whole nother conversation around when people are thinking about timing of tenders going out to market. So next year will be quite turbulent from a procurement perspective, simply because public sector will be getting to grips with the policies and the processes that sit around the regs, but so will the supply chain, and they'll need to think about, okay, how do we respond to this in that way? So that's kind of one area there. I think in terms of picking up the point in terms of, you'll get the best out of it if you take a partnership approach. And this is something that we've been trying to promote for some time now from the LCP, certainly since the start of COVID. The times that we're living in at the moment, and we touched upon all of those issues earlier, and it's almost like we're in the perfect storm of what can go wrong and what can create so much disruption. For me, if you open yourselves up to partnership approaches and putting in place 2, 3, 4, 5 year or even longer term partnerships if need be, that can help work with a partner in terms of managing some of the issues that we're seeing. But it also builds upon Kim's point around, actually, you'll get to know us more. You'll get to understand what we can do and what we can deliver as a partnership. And then all of those kind of other priorities that we will have around localism and community wealth building and even managing costs, you can kind of got that open relationship and work through those together, provided that you adopt a proper partnership approach. Now it's very easy for people to fall into the category of the contract says this, so I'm quite a big advocate of making sure, if we are going to go down that road, that you underpin that with a partnership contract, as opposed to kind of task and finish delivery type contract, because that is what will really drive out the benefits for most people going forward. And if I may, and I just go back to the percentage and on the last poll, and the reason that I put that in there is because I didn't feel that some of our public sector colleagues were in touch with the real world and the overheads and profits. And whilst we have framework prices that are in there, the reality is they may well stick on paper to those framework prices, but the costs, the additional overheads and profits will need to go into other things like materials or labor costs and stuff like that. So they'll stick to what's in the contract when it comes to the paper, but it's unrealistic to expect people to operate at less than quite frankly, less than 10% at the moment, just because of the cost of living, the impact of labour costs, the impact of the increase in materials. So, you know, people might dance around a little bit going, oh, well, it's only this, but in reality, you know, they have to put those in just because of the sheer scale of the increases in overheads that they're experiencing at the moment. So, you know, I'll finish there and let someone else come in on that.
It's a fair point, because Kim mentioned that he's adding 500 quid a week on labour costs because people are coming back saying I need to be paid more, and you know, with labour as a scarce resource, you can't afford to gamble on that. We've also I'm just going to throw in, Kim, it's your right to reply now on those responses, and I'm going to throw in the results of our survey on the rating of external experience in the process, which is, you know, more than half of our audience feel that the advice they're getting is poor. So I'd quite like you, Kim, to kick off a little discussion here about what advice, you know, what areas of advice here do we feel really need to be improved?
Well, I'm amazed. Thank you for giving me the audience on this one. I think this is sort of, let's go to the sort of the technical advisors, of which I won't name, but the 6 or 7 technical advisors. It's a revolving door scenario where the surveyors move from one to another. As far as our perception of that is, a lot of them will sit behind their computers, fire out emails. They'll be very equitable when we talk to them, but then they'll stick to the guns and throw out the instructions, etc., and then hide behind the parapet. It doesn't work that way. So I think more careful selection. I know from fact, by talking to some of the technical advisors, that they bid for their fee for their agreements as well, and they bid low, and extremely low. If you bid low, you're not going to get the top boys in there, and I think that's probably one of the biggest problems. And we get people who basically shouldn't be in that position, and it distresses our guys, because most people we have here have been, you know, they could run a business at the time they've been here 5 years. They're good. Something we haven't talked about, which going into this problem of how the local authorities cover some of their costs, we very rarely get a chance to, if we were able to collaborate more with our teams, and we're maybe a little bit different because we are quite design-led in terms of experience-led on mechanical, electrical consulting. We tend to use companies been with me for 20, 25 years. Now in the tens of millions, they offer very, very good advice. We can normally, if we see a deal, if we have the opportunity, as Barry knows one we're looking at the moment, we should normally be looking at, with other ideas, 15, 20% VE immediately if we were allowed to do it at the beginning. A lot of the projects that come out are they've got a team of architects, usually young architects, with a great idea, but of course the market is run by their previous thoughts. And the estimates for the job are concentrating on too much money in the wrong place. A good practical look at that, you can still produce a good scheme, but there's a lot of opportunity for taking that 15, 20%. And if we're allowed to get in early, we'll always do it. And that is, I think the authorities should consider that, because that answers one of their problems at the moment.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, we'll investigate that a little bit. But before we do, what's your response to the idea of longer term partnerships? I mean, isn't there a big risk for you as an SME in a longer term partnership, in tying yourself down to a single client, or is that just all good news?
No, I think it's all good news. You don't go in on a set series of fees or whatever. I think if you've got the partnership, you've still got to prove yourself. And the way I look at it is, we'll prove ourselves on value for money in terms of what we're producing, not the cost. It's what we're doing by the end of the contract. And we tend to finish our contracts on time, and within 1, 2, 3, 5%, usually the variations will be on the cost. That is not what the tender process normally does. And I know Barry will be used to 20, 30% added to the contracts time they finish, plus extension of times, etc. You can avoid that as well if the collaboration starts at the beginning. And that's one of our huge frustrations. We are more expensive in the tender side because we put more into them. We're less expensive at the outcome of the project, and that is missed in the market.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, so Joe, we've got this idea of a closer cooperation with the supplier. partly to understand where money can be saved, but in order to build a better relationship and be able to respond to market changes better. And is there, as well as a collaboration with your supplier, is there maybe an idea here where we need a closer collaboration with the expert advisors that you have on a project? So if you've got sort of anonymous surveyors responding to bids at very low costs and not really providing the service you need, is there an argument there to be approaching the advisory sector in a slightly different way, as well as the construction sector?
I think they all form parts of the same process to get to the outcome that we need for residents. I think that it's important that you get the best quality provision in any borough that you work in. From our perspective, we have a mixed market, some in-house expertise and some that we buy in combined, and we're always looking to get better quality and build on the what we have got, both in-house and in terms of anything what we buy in obviously a lot more for the major development. I think that I understand where Kim's coming from in terms of seeing mixed options available in the market at times, particularly most recently post-COVID. We've seen changes in labour supply across a range of categories, both in construction, actually in all the other sectors too, that I cover in covering everything in terms of procurement at my authority. And so that challenge around labour supply is something that is in all of our interests to think about. My experience of looking at this in the service sector, separate to construction, has been a range of schemes to build up that kind of workforce collaboratively across areas. And I wonder whether there's scope to do a bit more of that in the future in this particular sector too, where if there's enough of us who think we haven't got the right particular kind of advisors, or that we're needing to get something different. But in terms of drawing what's available from the market, I think there's a lot more pre-market engagement and understanding longer term about what kind of standard we're looking for and how that might work, because so many of our different facets of our business use those advisors in different ways, over and above just our main major development colleagues.
Thanks, Joe. Barry, do you want to pick up on that? And perhaps there's a role for a framework in that kind of collaborative process. And as you do that, I'm going to launch the last of our polls, which is the sort of flip side of the coin in a sense, to ask how our viewers rate the experience of council staff and their knowledge on how to deal with the current market dynamics.
Okay, so if we think about the role of a framework and how that can support closer working, obviously there are limited suppliers on the framework. So, generally, if you're fishing in a particular pool, if you like, within one of the lots, then there should be some familiarization with the supply chain, and you'll generally get to understand, who is delivering well and who's not delivering so well. In terms of facilitating the partnerships, well, certainly from an LCP perspective, whether you're using the dynamic purchasing system or whether you're using the major works framework, both of those facilitate entering into a partnership agreement. I think it's just people's mindset is not necessarily there at the moment, because they've all got their series of individual contracts, and they kind of deal with them on an individual basis. That said, internally, we are at Haringey. One of the things that we're looking at the moment is a longer term partnership, well, 4 partnership contracts, which will be probably somewhere between 200 and 300 million each, to support the housing repairs, maintenance and delivery. So in those scenarios, that is, that lends itself to that. But even, if you take FM contracts, for instance, we've got FM, we've brought that in-house recently. All people want to do is pick up the phone and get stuff done, rather quickly. So, in which case you can kind of put in place some partnership agreements around that can help facilitate that very responsive need to the demand. Schools, we know that there's going to be a program of upgrades and repairs and maintenance and whatever across each of the authorities. So why not move towards a partnership agreement with schools? And that way the contractor is familiar with the school and they can work with the school, you know, in terms of meeting some of their needs and that going forward. So I think, you know, I'm going to say there's nothing to prohibit generally. You know, some frameworks are very prescriptive in terms of what they can do and what they can't do. So you do need to be considerate of that. But those that are a little bit more flexible, that is an option, you know, but it doesn't have to be frameworks. You can go out on an open tender, restricted tender, and kind of, you know, create those opportunities and those contractual arrangements through that way as well.
Thanks, Barry. Okay, we're going to share the results of the last poll, which over half our audience indicates over half our audience are satisfied with the experience of council staff and their knowledge of how to deal with current market dynamics. So, Kim, I'm going to ask you if that mirrors your own experience, and I'm also going to put. We've had a fantastic question, very direct, from Patrick Hollins, a viewer, who wants to know if the system were in your hands, what would the appropriate split between cost and quality be to encourage you to bid?
It's over to me, yes?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very, very good one. If the team offering the client's consultant center are offering some good caliber in what and how they've set it up, I would say if you were to go for a minimum we look at is 50-50. We would favor 75-25 because there is the time to really bring in some thoughts. And I guess that's quite a push. It does nothing, offers nothing but good value, because then you are putting a cost in, but you're explaining why you've done your cost and where you could actually move to maintain that, and obviously offer reliability on that cost. Anywhere the other way around, you're just throwing it into the mix, and it's usually an estimation scenario. And we're most possibly different, that we live cost with our supply chain, so it's our insurance against the market. So we actually know what's happening and how they're responding. I would, you know, if we get quite excited about a 75-25 because it means we can show our worth, and then chances are we normally win. To your point about the return on that poll, I'm surprised. Not to be rude. Well, I'm rude. So.
Are you surprised, Joe?
I think when you're talking about experiences, you know, across the country, then you're going to get quite mixed experiences. There's some really good caliber people in the public sector who do know their stuff and have done this for many years. And unfortunately, you're also going to see sometimes people who don't quite know as much as they need to right on the front line. So I'm not surprised to see that there's over 50% of the people saying that they've managed to meet some people who know their stuff, who've really got at the heart of what they're doing, the communities that they're representing, and have managed within their teams to bring in some really good quality staff. But I appreciate where Kim's coming from. That isn't always the experience of everybody, and that there's always room for improvement.
And where do you sit on the 75-25? Well, what's the art of the possible there, do you think?
I think that you have to look at what's possible in terms of each particular thing you bring forward. It's going to be a case-by-case assessment of what you're really looking for and what the decision of in our case, the members would be around the nature of investment and the outcomes they're wanting, and whether that stacks up in the context of balancing also overall our budgets and the advice given by our finance colleagues in terms of our budgets overall. We have a range of different approaches to how we do our mix and our split between price and quality, depending on the nature of the development and what we're needing to achieve.
And I guess to you, Barry, and sort of summing up, I guess at this stage in the event, where do you sit on that sort of 75-25 on the balance of cost and you know what we're talking about as quality, but is a whole different bunch of factors. And do the current market conditions mean that we're swaying away from cost and towards those other factors because cost is so impossible as part of the equation? And does your partnership approach kind of lend itself to that? Okay,
a lot of questions in there, Toby.
It's kind of the same question.
Okay, so let me answer the 75-25%. So Personally, I'm not a fan of that. I think the price will, the price quality split will need to be a bit more evenly balanced. However, that said, it can work. And it can work if you are publishing or not, if you are stating that there is a budget of which they have to stay within, because otherwise what you'll end up with is really good quality submissions and potentially high cost. And the other thing with that is if you think about some of the other larger players in the market who can afford to have bid teams and get very good at writing quality statements, sometimes that can distort the market a little bit. But as Joe said, each project kind of warrants its own assessment of balance around quality and price. Trying to get 75-25 in today's financial climate is going to be a challenge to get that through members.
Agree.
And that so I think kind of just sort of have that in mind. And sorry, what was the other?
Well, whether this idea of greater collaboration as the way through these difficult circumstances, does that lead to a different analysis of the balance between cost and quality in tendering?
You would want a higher quality against that, so it depends upon the nature of the partnering arrangement, whether you've kind of got schedule of rates that underpin some of the core activity that they'll be going through and things. So there's a few dynamics within that. It's not it needs a lot of thought that's going into it. It also needs a lot of market engagement, so a lot of what we see where some of our clients get a benefit from is by doing pre-market engagement, discussing the opportunities and how to structure some of the commercial arrangements or some of the technical challenges that they need to face. I am very much for advocating that early engagement within the market, trying to understand the dynamics and the response from them. But it's no good doing the pre-market engagement and not listening to what the market is telling you. You need to incorporate that feedback if you want the best outcomes. And certainly those clients that we support that have done that have benefited greatly compared to those that have not, and have kind of remained with their own viewpoint. Sometimes people kind of do it as a tick box exercise. It is absolutely not that. Use it as a great opportunity to help shape and structure what you're going to market with, so that you can improve the outcomes and the responses from that.
Thanks, Barry. Let's leave that as the last word. I feel we've opened a dozen conversations that could go on for at least an hour each. But thank you very much indeed for joining us today, panel, and sparing your valuable time and sharing your knowledge and experience with our viewers on these themes. And viewers, I'm sure you'll join me in thanking you, Joe McCormick from the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and thanking you, Kim Ridge from City Axis, and thanking you, Barry Phelps from the London Borough of Haringey from LCP, for both your contribution to the conversation and for your support to make the whole event possible. And most of all, viewers, as ever, thank you for tuning in again, for gracing us with your attention and fueling the conversation with some great questions. We haven't answered them all. There are a few hanging. But if you join our LinkedIn members club, you'll find responses from our panel circulated there over the coming days. Now, we're going to be back soon on the 4th of October at 11 a.m. with a one-to-one interview with Councillor Tom Renard, who's Cabinet Member for Housing, Delivery and Homes at Bristol City Council. But before that, next Tuesday, we're going to be on site with a tour of the Gascoigne neighbourhood regeneration in Barking in London, and on Wednesday with an investment and development breakfast with Enfield Council. And then, crucially to this conversation, on the 13th of October, save that date, we're marking 10 years of the London Construction Programme at an in-person evening of celebrations and stimulating discussion on what is the real cost of not building? And that's the sort of follow on from this conversation. Can we afford not to be building the houses and facilities that perhaps we might not be able to build because of the affordability issues we've been discussing today? What are the other costs we've got to bear in mind here? So if you'd like to join us in person at any of those events, we'd love to see you, and details are in the chat. Meanwhile, from our fabulous panel, from London Construction Programme, from me and from everyone at 3Fox, good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.